Welcome in, everybody. A Friday edition of Birds 365, a football Friday here on Birds 365. Got a good show planned for you today. A little bit happening in Eagle Land. Not much, but a couple news, couple tidbits around the NFL we'll talk about. Got two good guests today. Johnny Mac, how you doing on this Friday?
Doing well. I'm glad Howie's not taking advantage of me. Anybody saw the clip of
Yeah, I
the
saw that clip.
Adam Peters? He's trying to put one over on the new guy and the Cooper DeJean shade. So that was pretty interesting. Anytime you get to see those behind the scenes draft
Yeah, I love
day
that
sort of
stuff.
things. I always joke he's trying to turn him into Jeff Carson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. For those few people that are fans of the movie Draft Day, which is a horrible, horrible movie, but nonetheless, I digress.
Good stuff, Johnny Mac. Couple things I want to get to real quick. Eagles got assessed their penalty or lack thereof yesterday on the Saquon Barkley signing. No penalty for the Eagles. So the NFL finds in their investigation the Eagles did not tamper with Saquon Barkley, or at least did not have the evidence to prove that they did. And the Eagles are going to skate away scot-free. So good stuff there. What's your first takeaway from that?
Yeah, that's what I thought was going to happen from the Saquon standpoint, because that was all just James Franklin kind of speaking extemporaneously, and I always thought, look, Howie's been around too long that even if he was tampering, he was going
Yeah,
to be
right. It wasn't
making
going to be that way.
overt overtures to Saquon Barkley. So it doesn't surprise me from that standpoint. I was a little surprised that Atlanta got a slap on the wrist, which kind of goes back to the Eagles. And one of the things I've heard from people around the league who are kind of, sometimes you think they're a little bit jealous of the Eagles and the organization, and people get sick of Howie getting his flowers and all that kind of stuff. And they talked about, Vic Fangio and integrating things. I'm like, well, if they're gonna investigate tampering, and I wrote about this at Sports Illustrated, you can't just say, oh, but they did this with Vic. You got to investigate Vic. This was about Saquon. And a lot of people thought maybe they were getting a little bit too brass in some of the things they do. But in the case of Saquon Barkley, it was all from James Franklin. And it was easy to explain it away. And the fact that he just misunderstood having a conversation with Saquon Barkley, and he thought it was Howie Roseman. It was really the agent, blah, blah, blah. So that doesn't surprise me. Atlanta, a little bit slap on the wrist, 5th round pick. And I go back to the Eagles with Jonathan Gannon. I mean, part of the reason why the Eagles got what they got is because they were fighting to get what they get, because they knew they broke a rule. And I don't think, it ended up Atlanta did it with 3 different players. It wasn't just Kirk Cousins. And they ended up only giving up a 5th round pick. I think that just tells it, hey, we'll tamper. We'll give up a 5th round pick.
Yeah, if you want a player, you might as well tamper. You're going to lose.
Yeah, who cares?
Right.
So I was a little surprised from that standpoint that Atlanta, that the thing was so light with Atlanta, the punishment. But with the Eagles, no surprise at all. I would have been surprised if Howie, left out a text message hanging of contact directly with Saquon Barkley. That would have been the surprise to me.
One more thing in Eagle Land I want to hit on. Our good friend of the program, friend of the network, friend of all Eagles fans who have ever listened to the radio in the last 30 years. Merrill Reese gets the 2024 Pete Rozelle Award for radio from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I'm a huge Merrill Reese fan. Johnny Mac, I know obviously you aren't an Eagles fan. You are an Eagles reporter, but it's awesome to me how much the voice of these teams becomes a part of the experience. When I think of the Eagles Super Bowl, the person I think in my head is the voice of Merrill Reese telling me they're Super Bowl champions. And I'm sure that's the same way for many fans, but pretty awesome to see Merrill honored by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Any thoughts, any stories, any things you can share on Merrill Reese?
Yeah, well, I am a fan of Merrill Reese because he's a very nice man.
Yeah, tremendous guy.
So that's the reason I'm happy for Merrill. And you mentioned 30 years. It's I think this is his 48th year.
Yeah, 48, right.
So, I mean, he goes way, way, way back. And, the one thing about Merrill, obviously, he's been doing it for 48 years, but every once in a while, he'll show up to a press conference and, he's a very small man for
Yeah.
those who haven't met Merrill. And, he's still at his age, the voice is just, it jolts you out of your seat. Like sometimes, those press conferences can be intimidating for certain people. And, we're all fighting to get our questions in and blah, blah, blah. And the horrible Philadelphia media and all that kind of stuff. And Merrill's voice just booms over all of us. It's pretty amazing. That just the and it's long overdue. Pete Rozelle Award, Pro Football Hall of Fame. Um, yeah, Merrill's a legend, well deserved. And yeah, I don't listen to any calls or anything like that, and that's not my job. And I'm not. He's obviously a great broadcaster, but you know he's a better person. I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
So
he's a
that's why I'm
fantastic
happy
person.
for Merrill Reese.
Yep, fantastic person. Anybody that's ever had the chance to meet Merrill one-on-one, Johnny Mac, like you mentioned, is definitely left with a warm place in their heart for him. He's a very kind man, very, very good guy. And he's, as we mentioned, he is tremendous at what he does. And he's become really a big part of the Philadelphia landscape. So pretty awesome stuff. I was very excited to see Merrill Reese. We had him on the National Football Show last week. So I love getting him on the network. He's obviously, he loves his Eagles, but he is awesome to talk to, awesome to get on. And we appreciate all of Philadelphia appreciates what Merrill Reese does for the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's that and good stuff. I'm going to welcome everybody in today. Kevin Savard, Madness, Jason Russell, Mike Fittery, Mark Holmes, whether that's the real or fake one, I'm not sure. We appreciate all of you guys being here. Suplex, Jonathan, Screwface. Welcome in, everybody. We appreciate you being here on this Friday. Another good week, another off season, 1 week closer to the Eagles season. I think we're around 84. I want to say 84 days away from the start. So we will see how that plays out. Johnny Mac, some NFL news I want to run by you. Trevor Lawrence getting paid
How about
$275
that?
million.
Yeah.
I mean, holy moly, what a deal for him. Looks like Howie Roseman's ahead of the game again. What do you make of Trevor Lawrence signing the big bag in Jacksonville?
Well, I think that makes it, since you go back to Jalen Hurts' $255 million contract, where he was the highest paid player in the history of football
Yeah,
for,
about 3
I don't
seconds.
know, 3 days, whatever it was, before Lamar Jackson signed his deal. Now he's been lapped. I believe this is the 5th time. So, I mean, I don't know. Well, actually, I do know why so many teams don't follow the Eagles' way of doing things. You saw it this year at wide receiver with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, and already Justin Jefferson, which I've been talking about for, it seems like months, is eventually going to reset the market. And he eventually did. And you still got Jamar Chase to go. You still got C.D. Lamb to go. They haven't signed yet. Tyreek Hill's going to want a readjustment to his deal, and the Eagles get what doesn't look great at the time, but it tends to look great over time. And other teams don't follow that rule. Most notably, good for Eagles fans. We talked about it a little bit yesterday with the Dallas Cowboys and Micah Parsons and C.D. Lamb, as I just mentioned, and most notably their quarterback, Dak Prescott, who's certainly, when he does sign, and not to say he's better than Jalen Hurts, but he's going to surpass Jalen Hurts. It's just a matter of who else does he surpass. Is he, Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence are technically tied at the top, and it's not about who's the best. It's about timing and
Yeah, who's up,
that.
like you said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that the impact of that position. And it gauges a little bit differently because I said nobody's probably, and I always leave the door open a little bit, but nobody's probably going to lap Jefferson at this stage. So it is a little bit different with positions, but at quarterback, yeah, I mean, it's the cost of doing business, and the longer you wait, the more you got to pay. And I don't know, people can't convince Jerry Jones of that. obviously, but there's a lot of owners, and that's what I was getting to. Not just Jerry most notably, but who will not allow their GMs to proceed the way the Eagles do. And I guarantee, and in fact, with AJ's the perfect example. They extended him so early. I guarantee 31 would say, well, we're not going to worry about that at this stage that early. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
So that's the majority of it. And Jeffrey Lurie, again, deserves a lot of credit for that and a lot of credit for allowing his people to act the way they do. So that's a big part of it. But yeah, I'm surprised in the copycat league that more people don't copy what the Eagles are doing from a contract standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that is an extra credit to Jeffrey Lurie because, like you said, like why are more of these GMs not playing ball like this, where you're just way ahead of the game and you end up, if you identify a player that you want to be on your team for a long period of time, you got to do it the way the Eagles do it, or else you're going to pay a premium for it, and that's what most other teams do. And it's pretty good to be a Philadelphia Eagle fan and have Howie Roseman, who's proactive like that. But I want to bring up one thing as we talk about Trevor Lawrence and his massive extension he signed yesterday on June 13th. Approximately 1 week before June 13th, 5 years ago, June 6th, 2019, the Philadelphia Eagles have signed franchise quarterback Carson Wentz to a 4-year extension through the 2024 season, which would have been this season. But the crazy part, the reason I bring that up is that was a huge deal at the time. It was $128 million.
Yeah, he was the highest paid player at that time.
$128 million. Like 5 years later, we are talking about double the money for quarterbacks. 32 would be a bargain and a half. You can't even get Baker Mayfield for $32 million. It's crazy how quick these contracts have gone up, especially for quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, and they're only going to go up further because of the new TV deals that they worked out when they kick in, because the revenue sharing with the players is tied to that, and that's the biggest revenue driver. So it's only the salary cap is only going to go up, and everybody knows it, and everybody's planning for that. But yeah, now Carson Wentz, from the opposite perspective of he didn't work out, is sort of the negative of going early.
Yeah, I would argue that they weren't wrong for going early on him.
So would I. I don't think it. Well, first of all, with Carson, there's a lot of things. I don't want to relitigate it, but most notably, I think the play. I think everybody says after 2017, the injury, they made the playoffs in 2018. They made the playoffs.
Seattle playoff game,
yeah, and he played well at times during those seasons. So the assumption that the drop off was that extreme. And then a bunch of stuff came into it, COVID and not doing what he needed to do in the offseason. He got upset when the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, which is probably not the best way to go about it, and all that kind of stuff. And it didn't work out in the end. But the assumption it dropped off after 2017, that's just not true. And he played at times, it wasn't as good as 2017, but he played at times at high levels in 2018 and 2019, leading the team. It was weird. 2018 was weird because, remember, he was coming off the season, the injury, and they struggled a little bit early with Nick Foles, to say the least. And then Carson played pretty well at times, and then Foles came back in. So people give all the credit for Foles forgetting about the start. And then 2019, it was all Carson, and they made the playoffs. And who knows what happened? They probably win that game, let's be honest, because they almost won that game with Josh McCown with a torn hamstring.
Funny story. I was actually at that game at the link. Johnny Mac, you might have been at that game too. I didn't know it at the time, but I was at that game, and I remember when Carson Wentz went down, and Josh McCown came out 17-9. The Eagles lost that game. They put up 9 points.
Yeah, and people don't realize Josh tore his hamstring early in the first half of that game and played through it.
Yeah.
But obviously had, I mean, at his age, he had mobility issues to begin with, but they were even worse from the fact that he just couldn't move at all. And had he been healthy, he probably wins that game. So if Carson didn't get concussed early, he probably certainly wins that game. And then after that season, and by the way, a lot of people point to that concussion. And I remember talking to Carson about that concussion, and he said it was very, very scary. It was a very serious concussion. And he was never the same. He played okay in Indianapolis. I think people forget.
Yeah, he had 24
2021.
touchdowns, 7 picks in Indy. He wasn't awful. I mean, he wasn't.
No, and I think the problem, and he upset Jim Irsay.
Yeah,
for a
that's what I
couple
mean.
reasons.
Irsay didn't like him. Yeah.
I mean, one, we're going down wormholes here, but one, it was the COVID era, so he was one of those quarterbacks that didn't want to get tested, and everybody, you're selfish and this and that, and yeah, that's an embarrassing part of human history. Forget about the NFL. What we did during COVID. So, part of it was that, and they did collapse down the stretch. They were in a position to make the playoffs, and they had I think a horrible final 2 games. So he got blamed for that. But overall, he was pretty good. And then Washington, he was just, the next year, he was pretty much terrible shot. But yeah, Carson Wentz is an interesting story. Maybe if I ever do retire, I'll try to write a book on Carson Wentz. Because, man, I remember not arguing, but, too much. I would get on social media earlier before I realized what a toxic cesspool it was. And I would try to go back and forth with people until they got, really off the rails and just angry and all that kind of stuff. But I remember laughing at them out loud, but saying Dak Prescott was better than Carson Wentz. This was 2017.
Yeah, I remember having the debate with Cowboys fans when I was an Eagles fan.
And the run to the, he was going to be the MVP if he closed out well, and then the injury happened. And I was like, come on, dude. I mean, this is the best player in football. And yeah, I was wrong. Yeah, Dak, slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, Dak Prescott turned out to be a better quarterback. At the time, I think you were right. Carson Wentz was better than Dak, but
oh yeah,
that's it. That's all it was for. One more piece of NFL news, though, Johnny Mac, because I want to get to a break. We have Paul Domowitch coming up. Hall of Fame selector will join us in a couple minutes after the first time out. Calais Campbell signs in Miami. It's notable just because I thought he was a potential one of those guys that might wait around and the Eagles could look at, to serve that Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph role if the D-line needed more depth. I thought he would have been a good fit. Very old, 38 years old, but still playing at a pretty high level. So he signs in Miami.
Yeah, I never thought he was a fit, other than the big name trap. He went to Miami school. Anthony Weaver's down there, who was, his defensive line coach in Baltimore. Now, I didn't know the Dolphins had interest, but mainly I didn't think it was a fit because while he is old, he's still a good player. And I thought he'd want a larger role than he could get in Philadelphia. And I think that's the case. I mean, he started all 17 games for Atlanta last year. It's
pretty crazy. 37, 38. Yeah.
He's a Hall of Famer. He's a great player, and he still wants a role. And his not signing was truly, and Justin Simmons is in this category as well. It's truly about he didn't want to deal with off-season bull, what, from a veteran standpoint. So he was always going to play. He was always going to land somewhere. I never thought it was going to be in Philadelphia because he wants a role. He wants to be a starting player, and he wants to play a lot. And I didn't see that role in Philadelphia. Now, other people will argue why not, because He doesn't play Jordan Davis's position, so please don't bring up Jordan Davis. I
Right.
beg of you. But Milton Williams is certainly not as good as Calais Campbell, even at 37, even at 38. So if you're saying, well, you're just going for the Super Bowl, but it's about more than that. It's a 1-year rental. And this is it for Milton Williams. He's on his contract year. So if you don't play him, you're not going to find out, and you're just going to let him walk, and maybe he turns into a player. A lot of things go into it than just, oh, Calais Campbell, I recognize the name. The big name trap, as Joe Banner would call it.
Yep, so Calais signs in Miami. Let's get to a commercial break. We'll have Paul Domowitch, Hall of Fame selector, coming up next on Birds 365. I want to thank everybody for being in this morning. Already 150 plus of you guys on YouTube, many others on all of our other platforms. So we appreciate all you guys watching. Make sure you drop a like. Stay tuned. Birds 365. We'll be right back with Paul Domowitch.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.